He was the last ruler of the powerful Central European Jagiellonian dynasty to rule the Kingdom of Poland and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. He married 3 times, but no heir was born to him. The death of the only love of his life and the failure to beget an heir to the throne led him to despair. The legacy of his ancestors, who made Poland and Lithuania a European power, lay on his shoulders. It was the largest, most ethnically diverse and the most tolerant European country of the 16th century. Zygmunt Augustus left behind him a huge legacy. He united the Kingdom of Poland and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania into a dual state by creating the Republic of both nations, a noble republic in which kings were elected by the nobility for life and the king's policy were discussed and had to be approved by parliament.
The Jagiellonians came from Lithuania and, at the end of the 14th century, received the Polish throne as a result of the alliance between Poland and Lithuania. The alliance between the two states was formed in the face of the common threat of the Teutonic Order, a mostly German knight order. Zygmunt Augustus was born in 1520 in Krakow, the capital of the mighty Central European Kingdom of Poland, which was linked by a personal union with the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. At the time of his birth, Zygmunt Augustus was the only rightful heir to this vast state, whose land stretched from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea and most of the land between Berlin and Moscow. It was the largest state in Europe at the time. His father, Sigismund the Old, was the grandson of the founder of the dynasty, and his mother was the Italian princess Bona Sforza, a person whose character deeply marked the future king. During Sigismund the Old's long reign, the Polish-Lithuanian state began to consolidate its power. The old rival of Poland, the Teutonic Knights, were beaten, and Poland was entering its golden age. Zygmunt Augustus' grandfather regained for Poland an access to the sea and the vital port of Gdańsk, the mouth of Poland's largest commercial artery, the Vistula River. The export of grain and other raw materials from the almost endless forests enriched Poland enormously. It was also during the reign of Zygmunt Augustus' father that Renaissance culture was firmly established in Poland. It was Sigismund the Old who rebuilt the Wawel Castle of Krakow in the Renaissance style, whose splendid courtyard can be admired to this day. A second wave of Italian Renaissance came to Poland with the court of Sigismund the Old's second wife, Bona Sforza, daughter of the mighty Prince of Milan, one of the richest cities in Europe at the time. Bona was educated as a future ruler and not as a monarch's wife. She was an independent woman, highly intelligent and very well educated. Bona knew how to influence her husband with reasonable arguments and flattery, but also with threats and tears. Although they had very different characters, Bona and Sigismund were happily married. She supervised many reforms and initiated many projects, such as building bridges, mills, palaces, and providing education to promising youngsters. Her policy made the poorly run royal estates flourish. She often said, "In your lands money lies on the ground. One should only kneel to grab it. Nobody wants it. All the better for me." Bona brought with her from Italy a whole court of scholars, artists, craftsmen and cooks. Generations of Italians left visible traces in Poland and Lithuania to this day. However, the most outstanding and lasting traces were left by the architects of palaces, churches and entire cities, which were built from the early 16th century onwards, the golden age of Poland and Lithuania.
Sigismund Augustus grew up in this outstanding atmosphere, surrounded by the culture of the Renaissance and under the very careful care of his Italian mother. In his youth, he was very attached to his Italian mother Bona, who in those early years of his life de facto ruled over the state on behalf of the increasingly declining King Father. Bona desired to raise his son an ideal ruler of the Renaissance. Nevertheless, she did not plan to give up her powers. She would not let the young boy and later adolescent wander too far away from her. This sickly boy was educated in a world created and fully controlled by his loving but toxic mother. This specific home atmosphere had a far-reaching impact on the personal and political decision of the king in the future. The Polish nobility disapproved of the raising of the prince by Italians and women. They feared that the king might become too feminine and not suited to become the king of one of the most powerful European states.
One of the prominent lords of Poland, Piotr Zborowski, complained to the older king in the following words: "What is this education in which the young king does not see the army? He would learn the country he is to rule, how to maneuver to make it prosper, and finally he would get to know us, his future subjects, who are the strength and pillar of his reign."
His future was affected by a tragic event that took place when he was 7. During a hunt near Krakow, a large bear was released from a cage. The bear torn to pieces everything on its way until he arrived next to the queen, who fleeing fell off her horse and miscarried on the spot. A boy named Albrecht was born, but died just a few hours later. Bona could not become pregnant again. She knew that by attending to this dangerous hunt, she threatened the future of the dynasty. Naturally, this made Bona fear for Sigismund's health even more.
Just 3 years later, in 1530, when Zygmunt Augusta's father fell ill, concerned that he might die, decided to crown his 9-year-old son king in an election called Vivente Rege, to make sure that his son would inherit the throne from him. This was an exceptional situation. Since then, until the death of the old king in 1548, the Polish-Lithuanian state had officially 2 kings. Sources say that Zygmunt Augustus was a tiny man with a slightly brown skin tone and a sparse beard. History remembers him as a great patron of art. He was exceptionally well educated. He did not have the formal education and was taught at home by Italian scholars and royal secretaries. He spoke many languages, including Polish, Italian and Latin. His mother surrounded him with the finest works of art of his time. Zygmunt Augustus was probably the richest king in Polish history.
The nobility of the Kingdom of the Grand Duchy, much of whom converted to various forms of Protestantism, hoped that, like Henry VIII in England, Sigismund would break the union with the Pope and create a national church. The Jagiellonians were Catholics, just like most of their subjects, but Zygmunt Augustus valued some of the Protestants' thoughts. He used to say, "I am not the king of your consciousness." This tolerant policy of the last Jagiellonians allowed to avoid the bloody religious wars that consumed most of Europe at that time, despite the fact that the state he ruled was the most ethnically and religiously diverse political union in Europe. Jews, the largest community in Europe at that time, Orthodox, among them Ruthenian, Armenians, Greeks, Protestants, Germans, mainly in cities, and the aforementioned nobility, Muslim Tatars, mainly on Lithuanian territory, and of course, Catholics of various nationalities, not to mention minor sects, all lived in harmony on its territory. The land yielded fertile crops for its people. The harvested land brought enormous wealth to the magnates, the upper class of the nobility, who particularly in what is now the Ukraine, famous to this day for its black, rich soils, made colossal fortunes. Out of all the natural resources exported, grain was at that time what oil is to our economy today. The growing population, especially in the west of Europe, made it a very valuable resource. The wealth of some of the richest nobles could only be compared to that of today's billionaires. While still alive, the old Sigismund decided to marry his son to Elizabeth of Austria from the Habsburg dynasty, competing for influence in Central Europe with the Jagiellonians. Bona, a great opponent of the Habsburgs and the German element in general, did what she could to prevent this marriage. She supported an alliance with France. In 1543, to her great despair, her beloved son took his wedding vows.
The marriage did not go well from the very beginning. The king avoided his young wife and preferred to spend his time with his mother and other young women of the court. The Habsburg envoys protested in vain to Queen Bona, whom they accused of keeping Sigismund away from Elizabeth. Bona burst into tears theatrically, accusing them of lying and trying to organize a rebellion against her. In the autumn of the same year, the young king met Barbara Radziwiłł, a young aristocrat from the most powerful Lithuanian noble family. This acquaintance quickly turned into a passionate romance and love bordering on madness. Elizabeth Habsburg, isolated from her spouse, quickly lost her health and left this world in 1545. 2 years later, Sigismund decided, against everyone, including his mother, to marry Barbara, which happened the same year. The ceremony was held in secret. Once the news reached the public, it spread like lightning across Poland and Lithuania and angered the nobility and his mother.
Although Barbara Radziwiłł came from the greatest Lithuanian noble family, she was not of royal blood, and their marriage could have led to political complications. A king marrying out of love was almost unheard of at that time. Nevertheless, the king loved Barbara so much that he imposed his will on the nobility until the majority accepted it. From then on, his relationship with his mother was gradually deteriorated.
This led to Bona's final departure from the Kingdom of Poland in February 1556. She died in her home duchy of Bari in November 1557, poisoned on the orders of the Habsburgs. The marriage to Barbara was a source of great joy for the king, but unfortunately, his beloved wife died less than a year after her coronation in 1551. The king was devastated. He followed her coffin on foot, hundreds of kilometers, most of the way from Krakow to Vilnius, where she wanted to be buried. Her loss marked him deeply.
Despite this, the kingdom needed a successor. The Jagiellonian legacy weighed deeply on his shoulders. In 1553, he married for the third time Catherine Habsburg of Austria, sister of his first wife. As in the case of his sister, the marriage was purely formal and no heir was born from this relationship. The parliament was now prepared to legitimize every child, including illegitimate offsprings, to secure the dynasty. But even this did not help. The king's policy was a continuation of the Jagiellonian tradition. The nobility, especially the small and medium one, had great hopes for his reign. In the initial period, the king carried out many reforms, including tax and economic ones. He strengthened the royal treasury and was able to create a professional standing army to defend the growing borders of the kingdom.
Zygmunt Augusta's reign was a period of economic and intellectual prosperity. The Polish language and literature were flourishing. It was also during his reign that Nicolaus Copernicus published his greatest work on the revolutions of the heavenly spheres. Zygmunt Augustus proved himself to be a skillful leader who tried to avoid wars through diplomacy. His kingdom's main rivals were the Catholic Habsburg dynasty of the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation, Orthodox Russia of Tsar Ivan the Terrible, and last but not least, the Muslim Ottoman Empire and its Crimean Tatar vassals, whose raids for plunder and slaves were a constant threat to his kingdom. He saw the growing danger of the Ottoman Empire, whose northern frontiers had reached Polish-Lithuanian one on the Carpathian Mountains in the course of the 15th and 16th centuries. Being at peace with such a formidable rival was essential for the king's plans to consolidate his power in Central and Eastern Europe. Two of his family members had already fallen in battle against the Ottomans. The first one was his grandfather's older brother, the King of Poland, Hungary and Croatia, Władysław III, who died heroically in 1444 at the Battle of Varna in present-day Bulgaria. He led a furious heavy night charge against the Ottomans. The second was his cousin, the King of Hungary, Bohemia and Croatia, Louis II, who fell during the Battle of Mohacs in 1526. When King Zygmunt the Old passed away in 1548, his son Sigismund became the only male of the whole Jagiellonian dynasty, to the joy of the Habsburgs. His mother, Queen Bona, discouraged him from participating in war campaigns or any dangerous activity. Nevertheless, the king was required to master the art of war. Sigismund Augustus, being an ideal king of the Renaissance, was surrounded by the best crafts of his time. His mother, Bona Sforza, was born into one of the richest families in Europe, and her management of royal lands made Sigismund even wealthier. The king had a great passion for precious stones. He would show these treasures to a tiny group of advisors and foreigners he could trust. The extent of his wealth was kept secret from the public. The king was also an avid buyer of tapestries from the lower countries. This passion started with his mother's dowry, which comprised Flemish tapestries, which were, in the late medieval and early Renaissance period, more common than paintings. They could also be much larger than paintings, which made them perfect decorations for grand chateaux and palaces. In the course of a few decades, Sigismund Augustus gathered some 365 pieces in his collection. To this day, 136 are still displayed in the Wawel Royal Castle in Krakow. Deemed by posterity a king of diplomacy rather than a king of war campaigns, this view was subsequently modified by historians. The king did not participate in battle and would mostly accompany his army up to a certain point, and then leave the command to experienced warlords that Poland and Lithuania did not lack at that time. Nevertheless, the king was very much interested in the military affairs, concentrating his actions on reforms and the modernization of the army. He personally supervised the renovation of older fortifications, provided the army with an impressive cannon arsenal, and initiated the creation of a Polish royal fleet with the ambition to solidify his growing coastline on the Baltic Sea. The king's passion for beauty and art also had a military facet in his outstanding armor and weapons collections. Sigismund ordered them in the best armor workshops of his time, in Augsburg in Germany and in Milan in Italy. Beautifully crafted armors were a marker of prestige and rank, and the king had to have the best one available, and up until the late 1550s, tournaments organized for the royals and nobles were still a very popular entertainment. The king also employed local armorers to equip his personal royal guard. Heavy-plated armors were still in use in the first half of the 16th century, but were gradually inadequate in battle as more and more sophisticated powder rifles and cannons made it to the battlefields of Europe. The main armed conflict of his reign was the so-called First Northern War. This war was waged for the control of the Baltic Sea between Poland, Lithuania, Russia, Denmark and Sweden. After many years of sieges, battles and diplomatic skirmishes, the Polish-Lithuanian state gained control of the territory of today's Latvia, taking control of one of the most important ports of the Baltic Sea, Riga. Having successfully secured his borders, Sigismund was able, in the second half of his reign, to concentrate on the internal affairs of his lands. The king was losing hope of begetting an heir to the throne, which would put into question the durability of the union between Poland and Lithuania after his death. Sigismund was determined to unify both countries and to leave a durable legacy behind him. The executionist movement, a union of small and middle nobility, placed high hopes in Sigismund. This movement had a great influence on the reforms that Zygmunt Augustus carried out in the country. Many of these demands, although not all of them, were gradually implemented. The king was required to respect and codify the old laws and the participation of the entire nobility in lawmaking.
Today, this movement could be compared to a civil movement. It had a great influence on activating and creating a sense of responsibility for public affairs among the nobles, for the res publica, which gave the name Republic, a system that was indeed to be created at the end of his reign. Among the many demands, there was one that was a source of conflict between the king and the executionist movement. The magnate families that had been close to the royal court for several generations had been holding in their hands and drawing income from royal lands, which the king leased to them. The small and middle nobility demanded that these lands be returned to the state treasury, that is, to the king, since they only increased the power and influence of the magnates on the king. Additionally, the decision to marry Barbara Radziwiłł was in conflict with that movement because it saw this marriage as a further increase of the magnate's influence on the king. The freedoms of the Polish nobility were very attractive for the Lithuanian and Ruthenian Orthodox noble of the southern part of Lithuania. The Polish nobility believed in the equality of all its members and regarded foreign titles with contempt. Poland had its own title system, determined by official ranks in the royal administration granted by the king. However, these titles were not hereditary. This egalitarianism can be summarized by a saying popular since the beginning of the 17th century: a nobleman on his holding is equal to a governor. The nobility was the heart of Polishness. It was the military and political ruling class of the kingdom. It tried, as much as it could, to limit the privileges of the city bourgeoisie, which was controlled in many towns at that time by German-speaking patricians. Peasants of different nationalities and creeds live on lands owned by the state, the nobles and the clergy. Although particularly in the southeastern, scarcely inhabited parts of Lithuania, the wilderness made it possible for many to avoid having a master. Some of these groups would later form the famous Cossacks, a class of free rebellious warriors whose fame would grow in the following centuries.
The crowning achievement of Zygmunt Augustus' efforts to consolidate the state was the Union of Lublin of 1569. It was the most important political act of his rule, as well as in the history of both states, until the creation of the 3rd of May Constitution in 1791. From 1569, kings were to be elected by the nobility, and all nobles could run for king. One ruler, 2 states, 2 treasuries, 1 parliament, 2 armies, 2 legal systems, but many similarities.
Another important decision of the Union of Lublin, which has had an impact to this day, was the actual relocation of the capital of this dual state to Warsaw. A good site, since it lay as Krakow on the Vistula River, but was closer to Vilnius, the capital of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. Last but not least, the Lithuanian nobility received the same very attractive privileges as the Polish nobility.
Sigismund's health started to quickly deteriorate a few months after the enactment of the Union of Lublin. He passed away in 1572 in the castle of Knyszyn, northeast of Warsaw. His death left both countries in deep mourning. Nobody knew what the future would hold. His body was transported to Krakow through Warsaw in a procession and a burial in Krakow's cathedral. That was the last great royal funeral in Polish history.
His death opened a fascinating new chapter in both countries' history, a common history that lasted up until the final dissolution of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in 1795. In the first royal election, the nobility chose a French prince, Henri de Valois. Known in Poland as Henryk Walezy, he would later rule France as King Henry III, but that is a story for another episode.